Afghanistan's poppy harvest has reached historic levels. It now supplies 93% of the world's opium. Not surprisingly, this upsets the US government. In an attempt to step up their war on drugs, they're pushing for aerial spraying of poppy crops. This could leave poor Afghan farmers even worse off than they are now. Critics say it will drive them into the hands of the Taliban. The Karzai government has resisted US pressure so far. But recently, the Senlis Council, an EU-funded think tank, has come up with a different solution. They call it Poppy for Medicine. It proposes licensing poppy cultivation and using the crop to create pharmaceutical drugs. Noreen MacDonald is one of the founders of the Senlis Council, and she joins me now from Ottawa. Describe the basic features of the Senlis proposal.
Well, the opium poppy that the Afghan farmers are growing for heroin now can also be used for the medicines morphine and codeine. It's the same basic raw product. And what we propose, and we'd like to test in a pilot this next planting season, is that the villages be given a license and force growing a certain amount of opium poppy for medicines, and that we also turn that product, the opium, into morphine powder at the village level. So not only would you give the farmers a legal income, but you'd have this spin-off jobs and spin-off economic benefits that the Afghan people so desperately need.
What's wrong with the current NATO policy, and if it's not working, why not?
Well, the counter-narcotics policy isn't actually a NATO policy. It's good to remember that NATO is the military part of all of this. It's an international community political policy, but it's been led by the United States. So it's classic United States war on drugs policy that's been pursued in Afghanistan, and it's been a spectacular failure. So it's primarily based on forced poppy crop eradication, which is manual eradication with tractors of the poppy fields just before harvest. So not only does that leave the poor Afghan farmers without any way to feed their families, but as you can imagine, when they see foreigners supervising that plowing up their fields, it turns them against the foreign presence there. They can't tell the difference between the private military contractors who are Americans who are supervising the forced poppy crop eradication and the NATO troops like the Canadian troops in Kandahar. So not only is it ineffective, but it's inflammatory and turns the locals against us. On top of that, the United States is promising chemical spraying, and that's a policy that we think will really cross a red line with the Afghan people. There's already a lot of tensions between the Afghan farmers and the international community, and chemically spraying the Afghan agricultural farmland will just light a fire in southern Afghanistan.
A senior UN official, Chris Alexander, says legalization will merely add a legalized component to the production. You can't legalize something in the absence of the rule of law. How do you make a proposal like this work in such chaos?
On the question of there's no rule of law, what Mr. Alexander is referring to is there's no classic Canadian or American-style rule of law. There's a very strong social control and a very strong traditional control. So what we're proposing is a license be given to the village, and if anybody in the village does not deliver the right kgs of opium towards the licensing project, the entire village will lose the license. Now, in those villages, just like small farming communities in North America, everybody knows how much land the other farmers have, and they know how many kgs of opium it should produce. So what we're actually suggesting is that we use the existing traditional social control measures to enforce the licensing. Now, we don't know if that's going to work. We borrowed that idea from microcredit, and that's why we're saying we want to run a pilot project in the next planting season to test out exactly how these ideas that we've developed after 2 years of research on the ground would work.
In a recent article in the Guardian newspaper quotes a senior NATO official who says that essentially what will happen is the Taliban will simply put a stop to this. A quote in The Guardian says that they'll simply tell farmers, sell poppy to the government and we'll kill and rape your daughters. I don't know if this is a little exaggerated or not, but they're essentially saying your plan is utopian. How do you respond to that?
All the meetings that we have had with the farmers, with the locals, have said, look, they know that it's wrong, that it's against Islam. They want a legal way to feed their families, but at the moment they have no option. So we believe when you actually say, look, there's a viable economic option here for a legal economy that's related to peace and security and stability here, that we're going to see a lot of people getting on board. And then we'll be able to divide up the good guys and the bad guys and see who's really involved in narcotics out of greed and who's there out of need.
Even members of Karzai's government, cabinet ministers, have said how profoundly corrupt the Afghan state is, particularly at the district level. In fact, in a recent Guardian piece, the man who's actually in charge of eradicating drug trafficking in Afghanistan for the Karzai government was apparently himself arrested a few years ago in Las Vegas for selling heroin to an undercover agent. With such pervasive corruption, how will a system like what you're proposing work?
As I said, it has to be this matrix, and first and foremost is dealing with this failed counter-narcotics policy and winning the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. So there's been a lot more time spent on asking the Afghans what they want.